It is wonderful to be in worship with you this morning, and I want to welcome you again to this service of worship. We're talking about compassion today. There are two passages of Scripture, one of which we read responsively at the beginning of the service, near the beginning of the service, and the other we heard Savannah read just a moment ago, the words of Jesus. We're going to begin with that first one from Micah. Micah, of course, is a prophet. It's from the Hebrew Scriptures. A prophet is one who speaks for God in a particular situation. All the prophets are speaking to their situation, to their people, and they are bringing to that situation a word from God. And of course, that's what Micah is doing as well. But just a few verses before what we read together, perhaps what we read is the most familiar, is where Micah paints a picture, an image that sets the stage for this particular scripture. And here's the image. The image is really of a courtroom. We would think today, a courtroom. Maybe for Micah's day, it would be the city gates where the elders would gather and an elder would hold court, would make decisions about matters of law or settle disputes among people. And so imagine a courtroom, and it's vast, it's cosmic courtroom. And in this courtroom, which is really outdoors, it's a valley, it's surrounded by mountains and hills, God is making a case, bringing a lawsuit against the people, God's people. And the hills and the mountains are witnesses. They've been around for a long time, and they've seen everything. And so they're witnesses to what the people have been doing and what they have not been doing, how they have been neglecting to be God's people in the way that they care for one another, in the way that they welcome the stranger, in the way that they care for the poor and the outcast, and the way that they reflect the love and the grace of God that they themselves have experienced. And so God is bringing this case in the courtroom. So listen to the words of the first few verses of the chapter. Hear what the Lord is saying. Arise. Lay out the lawsuit before the mountains. Let the hills hear your voice. Hear, mountains, the lawsuit of the Lord. Hear, eternal foundations of the earth. The Lord has a lawsuit against his people. With Israel he will argue. My people, what did I ever do to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me. And then God begins to remind them of all that God has done for them. I brought you up out of the land of Egypt. By the way, there's a play on words here in the Hebrew. It's kind of a rhyming play on words. A little bit hard to get that in the English translation, but maybe a way to do it would be this. My people, instead of saying, my people, what did I ever do to you? My people, he is saying, why are you fed up? Because I brought you up out of the land of Egypt. This reminder of what God has done. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam before you. Always, or very often in the prophets, there is this reminder of where they've come from and what God has done for them, and especially the salvation event of the Hebrew Scriptures, which is being set free from slavery in Egypt. And there is this reminder, I brought you up out of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of slavery. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam before you. And then God says, I did all these things that you might learn to recognize the righteous acts of the Lord. And then the response to that is a lone voice, apparently representing the people, and the voice is saying, in essence, God, how can we make it up to you? What can I do to make it all right? And that lone voice then says, what about a burnt offering, a completely burnt offering? Or a calf a year old? How about that as an offering? Or 1,000 rams, or 10,000 rivers of oil? How about that? Or, and here it gets a little bit ridiculous. It's already exaggerated enough, but then it's, what about my firstborn? It's ridiculous because they did not practice human sacrifice. Some of their neighbors did in their religious practices. What if I did that? Would that make it all right? Now, all of these are worship and ritual practices. So we might say, if we were speaking in that way, trying to make it right with God with our worship and ritual practices and whatever it is we do, we might say, God, what if we had the right combination of prayers? Would that make it all right? What if we sang the right songs? Or what if the choir sang the right anthem? What if we formed a committee to make it happen? What if we passed a resolution at a church meeting? Would that do it? And of course the answer is none of those things at all. But the response is, "Oh, human one. Oh, mortal," it can be translated. The Hebrew word is Adam, human being. Perhaps it's this reminder that God is God and we're not. Oh, human one, you know what's good. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Oh, human one, you know what's good. Maybe that phrase, oh, human one, or that word, Adam, is not just to remind the listeners who God is and that they're not God, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's saying to them, this is a word not just for you, who are my people, who are religious, who seek to follow my ways, but it's for everyone. It's for all of humanity. What is good and what God requires is to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. So when we think about compassion, because when we are at our best as a community of faith, we show compassion. And when we think about what it means to show compassion, what it means to live as compassionate people, this word from Micah is a word for us. What does the Lord require of us? But to do justice. To do justice. That's a challenging phrase, really, because it doesn't say to talk about justice, to form a committee to study justice, to rail against the lack of justice, but to do justice. To do justice. And when we think about that, showing compassion is certainly providing food for those who are hungry. It's certainly providing clothing for those who do not have adequate clothing, housing for those who don't have adequate housing. It's all of those things, but there's another step there. And when we talk about justice, it's that other step that challenges us to do something about the root causes of those things. Yes, to meet the needs. Jesus is clear about us doing that. But Jesus also calls us to look at the why question. Why are things the way they are? Why are some people outcast and some are in? And why are some people poor and others are not? And why are things the way they are? And what can we do to help alleviate the need in the first place, the root causes of those things. When you talk about doing justice, that's an active word, and Jesus was always doing that. He defined his very ministry as setting at liberty those who are oppressed, release for the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. He was clear about that, and always he was reaching out to those who were on the margins, to the tax collectors and sinners that were the outcasts as far as the religious authorities were concerned, to the poor, those who were in need, to the widows and the orphans, the ones who were most vulnerable in that time and place. That's our call as well, to do justice. And so when we're at our best, that's what we do. That's how we show compassion. As a community of faith, we have First Street Methodist Mission. The mission isn't just to provide immediate help to get people through a difficult time, but it's also engaged in helping people to address the root causes of their own situation sometimes, and also being advocates within our community to challenge us all to address the root causes of poverty. You look at our justice ministry. Our justice ministry is engaged in helping women and children to provide legal protection for them. And we call it justice ministry because it is an act of justice. By the way, Reverend Brooks Harrington is signing, is his book up here somewhere? Ah, there it is. Yes. He is signing his book in the Welcome Center today. No Mercy, No Justice is the title of the book. A very fine scholarly work that, as a matter of fact, is being adopted in seminary classrooms. All the proceeds from the sale of that book go to the Methodist Justice Ministry. He's signing the books over in the Welcome Center. But it is a ministry engaged in doing the work of justice. We have Dementia Friendly Fort Worth. It is our newest 501c3 that our church has started to help Fort Worth become a dementia-friendly city. It's a designation. Why are we doing that? Because it is the work of justice to make our community a better place, a friendlier place for those who are suffering from dementia and their caregivers and their families. And all of this is doing the work of justice. It's showing compassion in the most concrete way. The second thing that Micah says is what the Lord requires is to love kindness. To love kindness. That's translated in different ways too. It's kind of fascinating when you read translations in parallel. Sometimes it says to love and to diligently practice kindness, to love grace. That's a nice translation. To let mercy be your first concern, to show constant love, to treasure the Lord's constant love, to love being kind to others, to be compassionate and loyal in your love. The Hebrew word chesed just means loving kindness. And so those translations sort of fill out or show us how, in response to what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, we respond to that by loving kindness. When we love something, we are devoted to it. We care about it. We think about it. We work for it. When we love someone, we think about them. We care about them. We work to help them in every way that we can. And so to love kindness is to be devoted to acting in ways that are kind. Even when we don't feel like it, even when we may not be disposed to act kindly towards someone because of perhaps the way they've treated us, we are to love kindness, to be devoted to acting in kind ways. The Apostle Paul, when he listed the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit, what it means or what our lives produce when we walk in the Spirit, one of those aspects of the fruit of the Spirit is kindness. Kindness. And so we're called to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. To walk humbly with God. Humility is a word that we sometimes use in ways that's not very helpful. Sometimes I think as Christians we think to be humble means to sort of have a worm theology. Oh, what a wretched worm I am, that kind of thing. But humility really means knowing who we are and whose we are. Knowing that we are human beings and not God. God is God, we're not. And that God is the source of all that we have and all that we are. And so we walk humbly with God. To walk with God can be translated to be in communion with God. Paul wrote that we are to pray without ceasing, to pray constantly. And I think that's what Paul was getting at, this constant awareness of the presence of God. And as we go about our business, as we walk the talk, as we walk in the way, that we are constantly mindful of God's presence, of God's call on our lives. And we're in conversation with God as we live our lives. To walk means that we're on a journey. It's what Jesus calls us to. When he called his disciples, he said, "Come and follow me." The earliest Christians, before they were called Christians, were called people of the way. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." We follow in the way. Walk humbly with God. When we are compassionate, we're walking with God. We're reminded of that call of God on our lives. Now Jesus, when he was teaching in the Sermon on the Mount about compassion, he taught his disciples, and therefore teaches us, that we are to invest ourselves, who we are and what we have, wisely. That's that second reading that we had from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said to his disciples gathered there for his teaching, "Don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes, where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Jesus is challenging us to invest our lives, to invest ourselves, to invest our resources in that which lasts, that which endures. And that's important because where we invest ourselves and our resources is where our heart will follow. Did you know the early rabbis in the first century and prior to that taught that to lay up treasures in heaven means to do good deeds and to have good character. When you do good deeds and you are a person of good character, then you are investing in something that endures beyond yourself. When we invest ourselves in helping others, when we invest ourselves in doing justice, in loving kindness, in making the world a better place, then we're investing in that which endures, which lasts beyond ourselves. And that's so important because where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Yeah, I was thinking about that this week, and I have to mention this morning especially. We invested a lot of money at Texas Tech University. And it paid off. It paid off for our kids and apparently for the basketball program. But we became Tech fans not before we invested out there, not before we sent our most prized, what we love most and what is most important to us, that is our daughters and our niece. When they went out there to Tech, our heart followed. And we became fans at that point. Jesus is really warning us here in a way. Be careful what you invest yourself in. Because where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. And where do you want your heart to be? Don't you want your heart to be with God? With what God is doing in the world? Don't you want your heart to be with that which endures ultimately, that makes the biggest difference, that has the greatest impact to make the world a better place? We show compassion by investing ourselves in that which endures. And so as we go from this place, we go as God's people in the world. We say it every Sunday. May we go as people who do justice, who love kindness. And may we go from this place walking the talk, walking humbly with God, and investing ourselves in that which really endures, in that which really makes the world a better place. Amen.